Hi there, it's Matt Heffernan. Welcome back to my channel. This is the 5th episode of my Slithy Vlogs series, my weekly little behind the scenes and just general whatever I want to talk about kind of thing that happens every week here on YouTube. So, of course, in between my main, more edited, produced, scripted type episodes, and this is going to be a little more off the cuff, a little more just whatever comes to mind, stream of consciousness. But we got a little structure for this one. This is going to be in response to a bunch of questions that I put out to my patrons on Patreon, and the folks that are really responsible for making my site hum, and really an invaluable resource. Not just the money obviously is helpful, but just to have a bunch of folks that can really help meaningfully contribute by their feedback. So anyway, I'm going to get right into it. These are the questions that my patrons had, and I think the overarching theme of a lot of this is, why am I making this content for the Commander X16? So let's get right into the first two questions, actually. They're a bit related. Eric Donsbo asked, maybe you would tell how you got into coding. Did you code for the 8-bit machines back in the day? And Sol had a very related question also. What is your history with historical machines that inspired the Commander X16? Did you use a VIC-20 or C64 when you were young, or coming to the scene later? Why do you like these computer platforms that are so limited from a modern perspective? Very good questions, and really gets to the heart of why this channel exists in its current form, at least as it has been for the last year and a half, when I've switched into and really figured out that my channel needs to be about retro stuff. So yeah, getting into coding, this goes all the way back to second grade for me. And since I'm very old, and hopefully you're not too good at math, in 1982, I first actually touched a computer and got to play a game on the Apple II. It was loaded from cassette because, of course, in 1982, they didn't even have it on a floppy disk. And it loaded up a game. It was like some sort of math type game where you're like plunking in the answers. It was, I think I was a bit advanced beyond it when they showed it to me, but it was entrancing. It was really amazing. My only real exposure to any sort of computer games were through arcade video games like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, and a lot of those things had just come out. So I wasn't terribly good at them because I was like 7, but I could at least appreciate them and started getting into that. And at home at that time, we had what was already a very aging Coleco Pong knockoff. It actually came with a light gun. That was long gone. And you had a few variations of Pong, and that's really all I had played. And here I got a chance to be in front of a computer and actually play a game, and it was really cool. I just took to it right away, and I don't know if they ever brought that computer back, but that was really an indelible memory for me, was that first time. But the following year, in 3rd grade, I got to be in a class where they let us actually learn to program in Logo on the Apple II. And that by then, now the advanced year of 1983, they actually had floppy disks. Some of these Apple IIs had 2 floppy disks, but they weren't wheeling them into the classroom. They stayed fixed in our elementary school library. And they had those study carrels basically just converted into computer desks. And so instead of people using them to do homework in or study in, they just were makeshift computer desks, because like a personal computer desk was not a thing in 1983. So they made do with what they had, but they had a bunch of Apple IIs. Some of them might have been Apple II Pluses at that point, or Apple IIes, but they were all still that original Apple II form factor. And they had each had at least 1 floppy disk. Most of them had 2 floppy disk drives. Our school really going all out on that. And most of them had monochrome screens, usually green. I think we may have had a couple amber. And then there were an actual color display. There was like 1 or 2 color displays. But when you're using logo, the color display, things just kind of came out in this brown with these weird artifacts. So it actually was a much more positive experience to use one of the monochrome monitors. But anyway, in this class, they taught us how to do some basic programming with Logo. And if you're not familiar with Logo, it is a derivative of Lisp. So technically, it's a functional language, but the way we were using it was very much as an imperative language. And really as a control system, a very rudimentary control system for what they called the turtle. Now, there is an actual physical turtle, a little robot that would work like this, that this was based on. A very early sort of remote control, computer-controlled robot where it had a pen on it, and you could send commands to it to move forward or backward, to turn a certain number of degrees, either to the right or to the left, and then to put its pen up and down. And because you could then have this turtle actually draw a picture on actual paper. But for the more virtual experience, they had a little turtle icon on the screen, and you could use these commands, this forward so many number of pixels, backwards so many number of pixels, turn left so many degrees, turn right so many degrees, and they were sort of abbreviated, so you could do like TR for turn right or FD for forward, and then just space and a number. And so the result of the program was drawing a little picture. And so we got used to drawing more and more sophisticated sophisticated pictures with the computer. And that's kind of how it went, was, just occasionally getting some time on these computers and getting to program. And meanwhile, I did not have a computer at home at this time. That would not happen for a good 3 years. When I was 11, in the Christmas of 1986, I got one of these guys, a Tandy Color Computer 2. It was branded TRS-80, but of course not related to the actual TRS-80, that Z80 based system that was really more of a business machine. But Tandy Radio Shack had a very clear vision of, well, you could have a home computer. And the first Color Computer 1, was really a trailblazer, and that actually came out before the VIC-20, if I recall correctly, or around the same time. But it was really an attempt like, here, we need to really simplify it. This does not need to be a business class computer. It just has to be a fun thing that you can play with at home and a program in BASIC. And so that's when I really learned BASIC for the first time, was as an 11-year-old kid given this computer that couldn't do much other than basic programming. And there were game cartridges, and eventually I got a floppy drive. I originally just had a tape drive for it. But really, I was going through these books of programs and typing them in, half understanding what those programs are doing. That was probably the peak level of understanding, was half understanding. 50% understanding was a stretch goal. Initially, I had no idea what was going on, and I was just stupidly typing it in. But bit by bit, each program that I typed in, I understood more and more, eventually hitting that 50% mark, and had a lot of fun doing that. And meanwhile, I was the only person I knew that actually had one of these Coco computers. Of course, I could go to Radio Shack and have all sorts of stuff for it, and all these different games and peripherals and things, because, that was what their big seller was. I mean, they had that, and at that time the Tandy 1000 had come out, and so they were, that was a much more advanced computer, but they were selling still a lot of stuff for the Coco through the 80s, and but yeah, I didn't have anybody to share that experience with other than people that would come to my house. It's like, hey, look, here's my little computer. And meanwhile, at other folks, I had one of my best friends had a Commodore 64. So that was my primary experience with it. I didn't even know the VIC-20 existed. I don't have any recollection of anybody having a VIC-20. But the Commodore 64, that was just, part of the environment. Lots and lots of people. I knew a whole bunch of people that had them, and I kind of wish that I had had one at the time, and then we could have shared software. But I think the same experience would have arrived of learning to program in BASIC. And although I think with the Commodore 64, with the incredible game library that had, I probably would have spent more time gaming on it than learning to program. So who knows? Maybe this was a hidden blessing. So yeah, I never really did any programming for the Commodore 64. Like I said, I was really just playing games or watching demos at my friends' houses, and that was it. But like I think most people, it's not like I kept this computer. All of my old computers that now have value, specifically my first two computers, which was this Coco 2, and then my second computer was another Tandy 1000HX, are both collector's items now. And I gave them away, literally gave them away to folks that needed or didn't have any kind of computer. I was like, here, I've got a better computer now. I have no use for these old computers. You can have them. Never occurred to me that I should have kept them, or that I could have made something significant on them. And really because, certainly with the Coco, I couldn't at the time. I had replaced that. I was like 14. I was just, starting high school, and I got my Tandy 1000, and with that, I didn't have to program so much because there was a very large game library that worked for that. I did a little bit of basic programming on that, but not much. And but because of that, the Coco 2 went away. I later, as I'll get into later in this video, did learn sort of the assembly language that ran. It was a 6809 that ran on the Coco 2, and I also at the same time had a Vectrex, which actually a little earlier. I think I just still had the Vectrex and the Coco 2 briefly at the same time. I had the Vectrex first. Got that when Toys R Us was basically giving them away, and they both have that 6809. And that's certainly a programming language, an assembly language that I'd be very comfortable with programming in today. And even would have like like a decade later, I would have had the knowledge to be able to exploit these systems, but they were both long gone at that point. So it really wasn't until a few years later that I sort of, have these nostalgic feelings for these old computers. And especially as, I go through the computer software industry and just all like the sort of magic things that we can do with computers now. And I'm trying to push computer systems now to do things that weren't possible a few years ago. And that's that's what we do if you're involved in like research and development, like I am with modern systems. But yeah, it's just sort of like, well, I'm only understanding a tiny part of it, and the limitations are really why I like them, is because they are easy to wrap my head around, and you get a sort of writer's block when you're presented with a modern computer, or even something as simple as a Raspberry Pi. It's almost infinite what you can do with it, in terms of capability, it's like, yeah, you could have a full motion video game. You can have any sort of graphics, any sort of gameplay. There's zero limitations. There's zero compromise. Basically, if you have a more fancy modern computer, then yeah, okay, you get a higher frame rate, or you can populate the scene a bit more. But it's, you know, splitting hairs at that point. You're really having a hard time trying to find a way to push a system in terms of sort of a qualitative push rather than a quantitative push. It's like, oh, I'm pushing this so much more because I can run this game in 4K at 120 frames per second. Well, congratulations. You know, does that really if I watch you do that in YouTube on a 1080p 30 frames per second video, I'm not going to appreciate that difference. And I would have had that same experience of that game on a computer that was a fraction of the cost. But when you can make something really cool on one of these old machines and really push it beyond what the creators of the machines themselves had envisioned for it, I think that's a lot more exciting, a lot more rewarding. So yeah, it's just something that I've gotten into more recently after I've let go of all these old things. So let's move on. Next question here from Michael McDonnell. Do you code in assembly for any other processors beside the 6502 family? Well, as you know, you'll if you've seen my last video, you know that is true, at least when we're talking about the present tense. But going back, the first processor that I ever used or did assembly programming for was the Motorola 68000, my first undergrad assembly language class, a proper class with a lab of learning this, and I still have the textbook of a full reference of the 68000, and it's a really beautiful architecture to write for. Sadly, it's a dying architecture. There's still old stock chips. Folks are doing 68,000 cores and FPGAs, but they're not rolling them off the assembly line. NXP, who bought Freescale, which was the Motorola spinoff to take this processor business, they've stopped making them, and not fairly recently, just a few years ago. So there's still a lot out there, but you know, you're not gonna be able to make something like the X16 of the 68,000. Unfortunately, there's no like Amiga equivalent without probably having to resort to FPGAs to make it happen. Because yeah, they're just not selling it for the embedded market. There's other microprocessors that are better suited, more microcontrollers that NXP makes that are better suited to that. So people just aren't buying 68,000s enough anymore. And that's kind of a shame. So moving on to the second processor that I learned also as an undergrad was the 68HC11, which was a early Motorola microcontroller. And this is something that you can buy new ones of. And because they are very capable, they have it is a proper microcontroller, and it's based on the 6800. So it's a cousin of the 6809. I'm very well versed in this processor. I made a couple of projects. My big senior project as an undergrad was with that processor, and so I made like an actual robot that ran with that chip. And then actually somebody paid me as one of my co-op, which is sort of a paid internship jobs before I graduated. I was actually maintaining software that was written in an HC11 assembly. So somebody actually paid me to take this assembly code base and maintain it, add features, fix bugs. I actually fixed a bunch of bugs in it. So that was a really cool experience, being able to do 8-bit assembly as a job, even though it was part of a job. There wasn't enough of that work to like just do that full time. I don't know if that exists anymore, but yeah, I got a chance to actually to do that a lot, and that was a lot of fun. Then getting into probably the last time anybody paid me to do any sort of assembly language was for an Infineon, which was Infineon was a spin-off of Siemens. So when I first started, it was still Siemens, but the product that we were working on it was still in production when production shifted to this Infineon spinoff, and it was just basic micro. Well, it is a microprocessor. That's what a DSP is. It's a microprocessor that has can generate signals or read signals in an analog form, and converts them. Or some of them have an external digital analog or analog to digital, and it's made for doing that. And I believe this one was a 24-bit. So this was actually a card that would you could create a small ISDN switch for it, like a little PBX in a single computer chassis. And so we used this DSP to generate, you kids today don't know how real phones work. So if you have an actual landline phone, you'll know there's things like a dial tone. So yes, you could generate the dial tone with this, and you generate the busy signal and the ringback and all that. And it wasn't playing some pop song for the ringback. It was a old school ringback tone. And so we would do all these tones because what you'd want to be able to do with this PBX is just do peer-to-peer calls within the PBX without having to go out to the public switch telephone network, and be able to have that landline feel without actually going into the public network. And then it becomes transparent for the user. And then the user of the PBX, like if you work at a place that has a PBX, you probably have the same kind of thing, like, push 9 to an external line, and then you'll hear like a break in the dial tone. And then you'll hear a new dial tone. Maybe the dial tone sounds a little different. If you've ever thought the dial tone sounds different after you push the external line button, whether that's 9 or whatever, there's a good reason for that, because quite often when you do that, you are getting a dial tone from the public network, and coming from possibly a central office, rather than being locally generated at your PBX. And PBX, public branch exchange. For those who don't know, it's like, your office computer, your office phone system, so that everybody can have an extension on that. And most people are calling inside the company, and a few people call outside, so they don't have to have an outside phone line for everybody. It's a big cost savings, and that was a big market, 20 some years ago when I was doing that. But that is over 20 years ago now that anybody had paid me to do any sort of assembly language. And of course, I'm obviously doing the 6502 stuff with the Commander X16 and Atari 2600 and other stuff. And of course, if you've seen my last video, I am just now starting on the Z80, and we'll have a series coming for that. The first sort of preview episode was my last one. If you go back to my channel and check that out. And that's what I'm going to start focusing on more as my 6502 series sort of, wraps up. So Tim Soderstrom asks, what brought you to the X16 and 6502 specifically? Well, obviously they come together. I think the real question is, what drew me to the X16? Why am I here? And well, it starts, of course, with David Murray, the 8-bit guy. I have been subscribed to him for a long time, watching his videos since back when he was still the iBook guy. I was watching him back then. And so I've sort of been following him on his journey from being just a hobbyist, doing stuff on the side, making some videos, to becoming a full-time YouTuber, and arguably the most successful retro content YouTuber. So when he put out his videos, Building My Dream Computer Part 1, I was hooked immediately because a lot of the stuff, and it was an earlier video too, where he had mentioned some of his desires that sort of kicked this off. It's like, well, what sort of retro computer should get into? And that's something that I was already thinking of too. It's like, well, it'd be great. Maybe if I got another Coco, maybe if I got a Commodore 64 or something like that. But there's all of the things he mentions in this video, the reasons that make it hard to do that. It's like, I'm not really willing to do that. I don't really want to sit around and load up stuff on floppy disks or even worse, tapes, and then having to find a decent monitor to connect it to. It's a hassle that it's like I don't have nostalgia for how awkward and just boring a lot of the parts of these old computers were. It's like I'd love to cut through the tedium. I'd like to get something that is dependable to modern parts, and I could get that. I could regain that experience and really have something that would be inspirational for writing software for. As has proven the case, it's been inspirational for sort of spinning up my whole YouTube channel. And so when he first put out that video, that's when I first got the emulator, and I played around with it a little bit, but it was very, very immature at that point. So it was like, well, this is nice. I hope something comes of it. I hope this really starts going somewhere. And then by the time he released the second video, they had the first prototype board. And it's like, oh, this is really happening. So I sort of re-engaged at that point because I had joined the Facebook group and I was following some of the posts and some not a lot of real interesting stuff going on there. But then this video really kickstarted that group again. And it's like, oh, well, looks like it's now ready. This emulator is ready. There's an actual physical board. The computer actually exists now. So that I said, well, let's try it out. So I did my first demos for that, and everything sort of snowballed since then, and it really scratched that itch, especially considering that I don't get to do a lot of programming professionally anymore. I've been labeled more of a management type person, so I don't get to do a whole lot of programming anymore. And this really scratched the need of how much I really love programming, and also bringing back the nostalgia of my college years and post-college years of being able to create cool things and do assembly language and work on a simple system that had clear boundaries, and the constraints are what really drives the inspiration for me. So it was just great. I've been loving it ever since. Now, Jimmy Dunsbo, Eric's brother, at the time you wrote Chase Fault, you did it at an incredible speed. Well, thanks. Do you have a secret to achieving that speed, or was it simply excitement about writing for a new, old platform? And secondly, are you planning on distributing your games in physical form, sort of how the 8-Bit guy does? Well, to answer the first question, yeah, I mean, I think that was sort of pent-up energy, mostly. The fact that I hadn't programmed anything significant in a long time because I'd been too busy professionally, making sure other people were programming something and managing that project. So yeah, I did want to be able to do something myself again. And I think the speed was I was pulling a lot of late nights. It was all, after my kids had gone to bed, and I was able to just sort of hack away for a few hours a night. And yeah, so, probably for doing Chase Fault, you're looking at a few thousand lines of code. It's not huge, right? It's still just Pac-Man. The basic engine of the game is pretty simple. The variations in levels are achieved through just a very small amount of data, sort of sketching things out on a spreadsheet. And yeah, so it came together quickly because it's a very simple game. There's not a lot to it. And really, so you're looking, it took me just over a month to make it, but I was working on it every day for several hours a day. So yeah, it was, couple, like if I was doing it in 80-hour days, it probably would have taken 3 weeks maybe of 8-hour days. That's how long Howard Scott Warshaw took to make E.T. So, I don't know if that's what I could accomplish in that amount of time. But obviously, I had things a lot easier than he did back in the day. I had a better system to program to. I had better tools to do it with. I had, had Git, had Atom, had an emulator that ran at full speed. I had a lot going for me. So yeah, I just got it together quickly because I just wanted it, and the basic parts of it came together very quickly. But we're talking about most of the engine was like maybe 12 hours to program. It wasn't a lot of time, but I just had to get it out, so I did it. Then his follow-up planning and distributing games. Well, absolutely. The first one probably will be Chase Fault. Even though it is an open source game, that I will be putting out a physical media. I do have the physical relationship tier on my Patreon, and folks that are in that tier, nobody's in that at this point, because it is definitely a lot more expensive. It's more money than the family tier that I have a bunch of folks at. That's the highest level. So the family tier will get free licenses for everything. So like Chase Vault will be a commercially licensed program, and so they'll be able to download those commercial games for free at that level. But the folks in the physical relationship level will have the actual, I'll ship these out if I have anybody at that level at that time. And I'll be, of course, I'll be just selling them too. Obviously, it's open source, so anybody can go ahead and download Chase Vault and put it on their own SD card. But if they want something that's going to look like this, Perry Fractic had made this template of a SD card label that looks like a floppy disk with the X16 butterfly logo in it, and then I just put the little Chase Vault logo, part of the title screen, on there. And yeah, so that's what I'll be able to ship out, and I want to make boxes and do up the whole thing, so to have some nice artifacts for people to have. And that's what the plan is going to be. And of course, with something like Cavi's Quest, that will be probably an even more deluxe packaging, and of course that will also mean that people could buy it digitally or physically, and we'll be able to have just SD cards as the physical media, in short. But, boxes and stuff too to go with it, just to make the experience and to have fun sort of putting that together. And if I do get the curse of David having to spend, half of his time packaging software, well, I mean, if I can make this my job, creating these cute little games and videos, I'd jump at the chance, quite honestly. So let's move on here. So Soul again asks another few, are you planning to get real X16 hardware? And if so, which of the planned versions? And if you get one, how do you see using it, since you can obviously do a lot with emulation right now? What would be the first thing you'd want to run on at one of your game programs? So getting a real X16, yes, absolutely. I will be getting a real X16 hardware. I'll be getting the first version, the full expandable version. And I'll be getting that as soon as possible, as soon as it's available to me, and then I will be using it mainly for testing stuff that I'm doing. I'm probably not going to be doing a lot of sitting at it time in terms of doing any programming. I still plan on doing mainly assembly, cross assembly on a modern machine, where I can run all these tools and make the job a lot easier. but then playing stuff and playing other folks' things, I'll definitely be doing a lot of that because it's just really cool, and I love a lot of the stuff the communities come up with. But I think probably what I'll be using the hardware for most is for generating content and actual video content, not just screencasting. So I'll be making definitely be making videos on the actual operation of the physical hardware and doing demos on that, and maybe even doing some video capture from the physical machine, which would be pretty cool. But of course, the first thing I'm going to run on it, is the first thing a lot of other folks have been running on it. I'm going to run Chasefault. I think very obviously, because first of all, the only other thing that is of that level of detail, that level of effort going into would be Cavi's Quest, but I don't expect to be done with Cavi's Quest. I mean, maybe the demo version will be done by then, but really, I want to get Chasefault in there because that one's basically done. And once it's all up and working and verified to work on the hardware, I'm going to get right on creating those SD cards and selling the physical copies. Of course, the digital will be free because it's still open source, but folks want to have some physical media. I don't want to make a lot of money on it, but I do need to break even on the deal. So yeah, I'll definitely be probably loading Chasefault for the first time because it does a lot of stuff, and in terms of all these different configurations that are happening for the different layers, and yeah, I think it's a good test, and so yeah, that's probably what I'll do first. Now, Jimmy Donsbo again, have you considered joint development of software with Commander X16? Why or why not? Well, I have, and I am. Cavi's Quest is a joint effort. I'm not doing that entirely by myself. I have a few people that are helping me with that, the music and graphics, and hopefully some other stuff too. Definitely a big reason why I'm making that commercial is that I'm going to need a lot more help, and help that's probably not going to come for free. So I need to be able to recoup some of that by charging folks for the full license of the game. But what I hope to have at the end of it is a full-on, Sierra adventure type game that people can play on the X16, and really recapture that experience that I also feel is desperately missing. And so yeah, that's the thing. And then there's other projects. I had been involved in one project that sort of fell through, but that will get resurrected in some form, at least the part that I did. And I'll talk about that a bit later. Michael McDonnell again. Would you consider expanding your Hello CC65 video into a series? Well, I mean, I did, right? I have that. I have the 2600, the NES, and Super Nintendo, sequels to that. So, but of course, yeah, I think he's talking more about specific X16 sequels to that, and tutorials kind of like that. But anyway, maybe incorporating things you taught in the assembly series and expand on the Hello Mix.prg. And for folks that haven't seen Hello CC65, Hello Mix is it's C and assembly linked together using CC65. And yeah, that may be something I'll do more. Maybe do some C related content at some point. And I think that you're trying to create a sophisticated game or demo or something with C. I think it's still going to be a bit of a too heavy of a lift. The contortions you have to go through to make that happen on C are generally not worth it. But if you've got like some mathy stuff, C is probably a good choice for dealing with a lot of that math. And yeah, especially if there's like a floating point library in C, yeah, that would really make a lot more sense to use. So yeah, I'll definitely be doing that. But maybe first hello, Specky. So that model will probably be in the actual series that Hello CC65 kicked off. That will probably be the next one before I start getting into the full-on ZX Spectrum tutorial. I will be probably doing something like Hello Specky and being able to do a Hello World using Z80 assembly. And yeah, so that's what we'll definitely have, at least that much, and maybe with the X16 something else in that series that if I can figure out an angle that's going to make sense. And again, outside of what the tutorial series is already doing. And then Ben Speakman asks, can you give an outline of the remaining things you want to cover in the assembly tutorial series? Well, the very next episode is currently under development. I already have the thumbnail title screen for it. It's going to be on the YM2151, lesson 17 on FM synthesis. And yeah, so how you turn this little chip into a whole band. And I'm going to... this is a very hard one, so there's a lot going on there. I'm not going to fully explain the 2151 because that could be a whole series into itself. And I don't fully understand everything. I'm not, I'm not Wendy Carlos here. I'm not an expert on music synthesis. So I would highly recommend, though, is there are a few videos like... Wendy Carlos has done a bunch of videos sort of explaining how synthesis works. And, she's like probably the greatest artist ever in this medium, going back to Switched on Bach back in the 60s, using the original Moog synthesizers. And the things that she's done and the way she's able to explain it, it's really quite exceptional. So I definitely go back and check those out. But what I'm going to do is more concentrate on, well, how do you manage the data? How do you sort of, you can program it a little bit, but mainly how do you take something built by Deflamask? And I'll get into that, but I'll also show like, well, here's a patch. So somebody's going to have to make a patch for you. Otherwise you're going to have to get into the weeds of the 2151. So that's a tricky video. That's why I'm taking a little more time on that one. Meanwhile, I still have an episode on sprites coming. I've got a file IO. Of course, I'm going to wait on that one until the R39 release is out, so that part of the code is fully stabilized in the kernel. And I'll do a PCM audio. I've, of course, done a couple demos of PCM audio, but I'm going to really get into the actual assembly language of it. How do you do that with Vera with those PCM registers? And then maybe something else. I don't know. Those are the only definite episodes that I want to do before I fully move on from this series. So yeah, we're looking at 20 episodes. 20 is a nice round number. I may leave it at that, but if I think of something else, like there's a bunch of stuff in the kernel I'm not really addressing, like a lot of the GEOS stuff that I don't really care about that, frankly. I don't like the way that it works. I don't think they're generally applicable unless you're doing a GEOS application, and maybe some folks will, but it doesn't really appeal to me at all. So yeah, that's it for the series as far as I can tell. Anyway, moving on, Ben also asks, any thoughts on turning the tutorial series into a book? And then Evil the Cat says, well, I think Ben's question is great, and I would like to add the following. If you do produce a book, will it include a problem-solving section? Or better yet, would you consider adding a problem-solving section to your assembly language tutorial at GitHub? Nothing extensive, just a couple of challenge problems as relate to each tutorial. And to that I say, well, that escalated quickly. So a book is big, right? So if I were to take that series and put it into book form, I mean, I have the scripts. The scripts would need to be heavily edited. And then the book itself would be pretty small because we're talking about, so I'm coming up with like a 6 to 7 page script for each episode. There's going to be about 20 episodes. So you're looking at a I can't do math right now. So yeah, so like 140 pages, and maybe I would have code listings in that. It could, maybe be a 200-page book if I really padded it out. I don't know who would really want to buy a book like that. So yeah, that's something that would require a time commitment that would be really beyond what I'd be able to do, and be able to do these videos. It would be taking a sabbatical probably from putting out videos as I do the book. It would probably just be vlogs like, hey, I wrote some stuff in the book today, and there you go. So yeah, but I think maybe the problem solving section, that may not be a bad idea. That's something I'd consider. I don't know if GitHub would be the correct place for posting that. I could do a markdown version of some of that, but yeah, that's, again, a lot of that is just stuff that is a bit beyond what I really can make a time commitment on. For those of us that still have to toil at a day job while doing this stuff. So yeah, that's about it. Meanwhile, Jimmy Donsbo, do you have any games for the Commander X16 in the pipeline that we have not heard about yet? Maybe. So, nothing I can really talk about right now. There's a game that I may be collaborating on somebody with, and that may end up being ported to the X16 or initially developed on the X16. That has yet to be determined, but that's about all I'm saying about that. I do have other stuff that I've been sort of looking at that is not X16 related. I have some plans for other types of games. Obviously, I have the Alice game for the Atari 2600. I'm in the middle of working on that too. But yeah, but nothing definitely coming for the X16 that nobody's heard about yet. Definitely you've seen the if you look on my channel, you would see the RPG map demos that I had on there. So I still have that engine, and that may turn into something at some point. I know, we'll see. We'll see what makes sense going down the pike, what I have time to deal with, which is, not a heck of a lot. So I think that's it, right? Yep, that's it. So let's go to the terminal, or right to our X16, because you know what time it is. It's time to say, if you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe. Click like on this episode, and put some comments in. If you had some other questions that you would like addressed, I could consider putting that in a later episode, or better yet, just become a patron, and then you could totally ask me the questions, and you'll definitely get included on that, and your answers to your questions will be prioritized. But these folks right here they're in the club, and they have pledged as little as $1 a month on Patreon. They're getting early access to these videos. But if you're just want to see the videos and enjoy them for free, as you can on YouTube, it really helps though if you subscribe and you click that bell to get notified when the new episodes come out. And but if you're a patron, you'll get notified even sooner, and you'll get that early access, and you'll be notified via Patreon. So whichever way works for you, please do it. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did like this, if you'd like to see more Q&As, let me know by doing that thumbs up, put it in the comments, and I'll see you again soon. All right, bye-bye.